Okay, class, where we are, I wanted to trail out on something I did on the last one, right before we go to the vertebral column. And that is, I wanted to show you this temporalis muscle I kept mentioning that went under this arch right here, that arch, to hook to this right here. See, that's that TM joint. That muscle hooks right there if I shave the arch. And so when it contracts, it pulls that jaw up. It gives that that force to bite down on stuff. Because there's your TM joint, and that muscle right here hooks to that. But it had to go underneath this arch. Because think about it, if it wasn't protected, if you just put your hand on the side of your face, you couldn't bite down because you trapped the muscle. All right, this is called the temporalis muscle. Okay. Anyway, let's go further now. I'm going to close. So now where we are, we want to get into the spinal column. So let's just do this. Okay. The spinal column is curved. So let's start first with this. It transmits weight to the trunk to lower limbs, surround and protect the spinal cord. You have different vertebrae we're going to look at real quickly. You have 7 vertebrae in the cervical, 12 in the thoracic, lumbar 5, sacrum 5, but they fuse together, and the coccyx 4 to 5. Okay, so let's look at this. Increase the resistance. You have different curvatures, concave curves in the cervical and lumbar. Concave in the cervical, concave and concave, okay? And the convex, this one and this one, sacrococcygeal and thoracic. And it acts like a spring. So in order to transmit weight, it's kind of like a curved spring that bounces. And these intervertebral discs also add cushion. So when you're jumping up and down, the spine, it's not straight, and you don't jumble up the brain, shall we say. Okay. Then you have the ligaments that attach and everything like that. All right. Then you have the cushion-like pads between, like I said, which are the intervertebral disc between there. Okay. Here's your intervertebral disc. There's that disc right there. See that right there, you have a jelly-like center. I'm going to call it the nucleus pulposus. And this is the annulus fibrosus. And sometimes sometimes it can be so much pressure, the disc can push out. That's what we call it, to herniate a disc. To herniate a disc. Okay? And if it herniates, see, it's going to push on those nerves. If it herniates, it would push on the nerves that are coming out. Okay? Remember, those would be those spinal nerves coming out. Okay, so let's go to our list here. And let's go to a typical vertebrae. So let's just walk through it. Okay. The body of the vertebrae is this. That's the weight-bearing portion. The spinous process is this. If you run your hand along the center of your back, you feel those processes. Okay. The vertebral foramen is this hole. That's where the spinal cord is, right there. And if you add up all the vertebral foramen together, stack them up, you get the vertebral canal, which is the stack of all the vertebral foramens lined up. The vertebral arch is this which comes off the body. So coming off the body, that whole thing is the vertebral arch. So now we're going to look at the parts of the vertebral arch. The pedicle is this first part that comes directly off the body. That's the pedicle. Then that fuses here to in the center, and that part there that is fusing with, so the pedicle goes into the lamina. That's the lamina right there. That's the lamina. That's the lamina. So pedicle, that's the lamina. They fuse in the center. And sometimes they don't fuse, and you'll have two spines, sometimes called a bifid process. Okay. The transverse process is this right here. That's the transverse process coming off. Intervertebral foramina, that's this here. That space where the spinal cord, where the spinal nerves come out. That's because it's between the vertebrae. That's the intervertebral foramina. All right. So then let's go and talk about the various vertebrae. So we're going to start first with the cervical vertebrae. Now the key to the cervical vertebrae is they have a transverse foramen. A transverse foramen. So we're going to do the cervical. Okay. All of these have a transverse foramen. The reason for the transverse foramen is that an artery goes through here called the vertebral artery. The vertebral artery goes through there. Okay, class, I want to quickly just show you this. This is the vertebral artery going in those transverse processes. And it's only in the cervical, and that comes up and goes into the brain. So I just wanted to show you that real quick. All right. So the transverse processes, the transverse foramina, I said transverse process. The transverse foramina are only going to be in the cervical vertebrae. The cervical. Okay. Only in the cervical. The first vertebrae that you have is called the atlas, and that's because the skull is balanced on that. It's like Charles Atlas. And these facets are where you have articulation with the vertebrae. So the first one is called the atlas, and the second one is called the axis. The second one is called the axis because the head rotates on this pin. That pin there is called the dens or the odontoid process. So look in your book now, because I can't do it all. So the first one is called the atlas, the second is the axis, and the reason is the axis is because it has this odontoid process, known as also called the dens, that you rotate the head on. Okay, that's the cervical vertebrae. So the key to that is, if you see a transverse foramen, you know it's cervical. If you see a dens, you know it's C2. All right. So then we go to the thoracic vertebrae. So I'm just following this list here. The thoracic vertebrae would be these here. This is thoracic. What you have are what we call these costal facets. You don't have that in the others. And the costal facets are going to be where the ribs attach to. So the costal facets of the transverse process are going to only be in the thoracic, and that's where the ribs hook to. That's one area. It's not the only one. It also hooks up in here too. It also hooks up into the body area, but that's that. Okay, the lumbar vertebrae. Let's go. The main thing about the lumbar vertebrae, and I want you to kind of study this yourself, is on the lumbar, the body is big. And why? Because you have a lot of weight bearing in the lumbar area. The lumbar. So you don't have those transverse. So in other words, if you saw lateral holes, transverse foramina, you know it's cervical. If you saw this here, which would be, let me go to one. Where's my deal here? Where did we do it? If you saw that right there, that costal facet, you know that's thoracic. Okay, I'm going to the sacrum now. And the sacrum is fused. All of these are fused together in you. It fuses around the late teens. Late teens. Okay, that's the sacrum. Okay, so what you have is, I'm going to go to the back. You have this medial sacral crest. See, that's that there. I'm just naming what she has. Okay, you have this sacral hiatus. Okay, I'm going to turn it around right there. That's the sacral hiatus right there. You have the sacral foramina because there's a hole going straight through here. There's a hole coming through here. That's the sacral canal. The sacral foramina are basically these here. You have posterior sacral foramina right there, these holes here, and you have anterior sacral foramina. Now you'd say, well, isn't that the same hole? Not really, because straight through here, and I don't have a drawing to show you that, there's that this is fused here. This is the best picture I can show you of the sacrum. See, there's a space here. That's that sacral canal. And so there's a back hole and a front hole, a back hole and a front hole when you look at these sacral foramina. That's why you have a posterior sacral foramina and an anterior. Okay. So when you get, the sacral foramina, there is a posterior and an anterior. And then that sacral canal is between there. That's what I was showing you, between there. Okay. Here's the coccyx. It's fused also. Nothing to say on that. All right. So now we go to the ribs. Let's do the ribs now. Okay. On the ribs, this is what we basically have. So we're looking at the ribs, and they're coming off the thoracic vertebrae. All right. So on the ribs are hooked to the thoracic vertebrae. They come around and they meet at the sternum there. All right. So on a rib, see, there are two hits on this rib. I wish we were in class. It articulates right here with the two vertebrae, and then again here. So it's articulating at two spots on a rib. Otherwise, if it was just one spot, it would be floppy. The rib is going to have a head, a neck, shaft region, and then it's going to attach to the costal cartilage before it goes to the sternum. So in other words, here's right here, that's the neck, that's the head, neck, that angle comes around of the rib and does. Now the tubercle is right here. Let me see if I can show you a tubercle. Okay, tubercle is right there, and that tubercle of the rib articulates with that transverse facet of the thoracic vertebrae. Very difficult with pictures to show you everything. Okay, and here would be the shaft of it. So what your ribs do is they come around and they articulate with cartilage, hyaline cartilage, before they go into the sternum. But around 45, this becomes bone. This becomes bone. So if you're doing CPR with a person, let's say 60, where you push in on the chest, you may crack ribs. You still do your CPR because we can get the ribs fixed. All right. So that's how the ribs are. Now, when it comes to the ribs, let's look at this. This is the general pattern in most people. You have 7 true ribs, because all of them are coming in on their own individual cartilage. That's 7 true. We generally have 3, or shall I say 12 ribs. We generally have 3 that some people will call false ribs because they come in together. And then the last 2 some will call floating. Okay. They would call, so in other words, true 7 and 8 to 12 false ribs, but most will say the false are 3 and the floating are the last 2, because they don't meet at all. Okay. The intercostal spaces, that's these spaces here between the ribs, the intercostal. So like, for example, that's the first intercostal space right here. See what I'm talking about? Because here's the clavicle. So in other words, I'm sorry, that's first intercostal, second, third, like that. That's between there. We already talked about the intervertebral disc. Here's the sternum right there. That's the sternum. It has a manubrium, body, and xiphoid. Xiphoid is generally cartilage. That's what we call the sternal angle right there. Okay. All right, we're going to close right here.